I always wanted to do something with my hands. So and to do something investigative. So maybe become something like a medical doctor, but I didn't want to, work in a strong kind of old hierarchical environment. So I didn't. I became engineer instead. Engineer for constructing devices, like medical devices.
Fantastic. And what has brought you to, your current topic? Like, how did that journey from where you were, as engineer to structured documentation?
Well, I spent about 15 to 20 years in IT, doing business applications for various large companies in Germany and throughout, like global companies and car companies, defense, banks, every kind of branch that you can imagine. And we always had to do with workflow applications, that is cutting down processes into single steps and single procedures, and that's the way of thinking I had implemented in those days. And and then I came into medical device software system design, and there I saw, okay, they intended to write down everything in Excel files and Word documents, and then they, even in the company where we had a kind of up-to-date system to managing documents, which was an Excel table. I experienced that it's really hard to sit before that table and not to know, oh, has this test report not been written for this version? Or is it just not filed in this Excel table? Or has someone made a mistake when filing it and giving it the wrong number, so we can't identify it? And then trying to find out what's the truth, and maybe having to go back to my test manager and telling him, okay, you forgot to maybe to upload this file, or is it there? And have these discussions. That was really bad time. So I was going on to find a solution for, okay, how can, during the moments when our developers do their work, how can the documentation they need for this work already be used for the regulatory documentation? That was then what I tried to find out, and that's why I found a tool which managed to do so, and I still went on using it by then, and then I was part of this team who created that tool. And now I'm a consultant trying to bring this idea into the world. Okay, guys, you have to go on, please, and digitalize the documentation. Makes your work easier.
Right. Pretty please do that. So let's dive in.
Yeah. So first of all, the question always is why? Why do we have to create all these documents that we have to bring in then to FDA or to notified bodies? What do we have to prove when we want to show evidence and when we want to prove we are compliant to medical device regulations? So why do we need this detailed documentation? This is a question to you, and you can just use the chat and give some ideas why you think we do have this document. Why do we need it? Well, do we wrap these documents around the patients to save them? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If anybody hasn't been promoted to panelist that wants to be promoted to panelist, just raise your hand in the with the virtual hand raising thing. Sorry, I'm trying to do too many things at once.
Yeah.
And we had a question, how do you register for Leo's thing next week? It's just medgroup.biz/calls is the single login for everything. Right now it says register for Regina's, but underneath it says upcoming. So you can register for all upcoming calls by going to medgroup.biz/calls. I'll put that in the chat. And yeah, so let's keep going.
Yeah, so we have a lot of ideas why we want to have this documents, and actually it's it's patient safety, but the authorities, they really want evidence that your processes and procedures and the products and the decisions that brought you to every single line of code or every design decision are controlled, traceable, and risk aware. And that's what they want to see in an audit. And that's why it's a law that you have to use this kind of documentation, which contains all the information how this product has come to life and how it was made and which procedures you said you want to follow to make sure it's the same product every time you produce it. So that's the reason why it was made. So actually this documentation contains all the information about your product and about your company. And of course, it's easier to create this documentation after the product has come to life, but it then will only have this information for the auditor. And of course, that will save your company and cover your ass. But actually, this information could be used much better if it was there before. And like here we have an example of a situation of the company of a ventilator for people in 10 stations. They have to be ventilated. And in South Korea, there is no nickel allowed in screws that are in such ventilators. And so the manufacturer has either to take his product from the market, or they have to exchange the screw. And now imagine what happens if you were the manufacturer in your company when a little screw in a ventilator machine has to be replaced. Where will people have to go, and how can they identify that everything has been done and the screw will be replaced once the next product is going out? What do you think? Where will people have to go? And how long would it take in a company, in the way that it's documented today, to make this screw really be exchanged in the next version of the product? Sorry. So you have to go to a lot of various IT applications, to various document file repositories, to various Excel files, and adopt them all, and to know, okay, which documents will I have to touch? Who can do that work?
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday, and it was really eye-opening that one tiny change, like a tiny screw, and for one country, impacts everything from supply chain all the way across the company, and that the number of places that needs to be documented and changed is incredible. So now imagine a standard change coming along like 60601, and it's going to impact the quality management system in the numerous areas and divisions of the company, where entire protocols are going to need to be rewritten. Now the screw example is a small nightmare example. In the major regulatory changes, such as EU MDR or standard changes that have far-reaching impact, create a documentation nightmare of epic proportions. And then you amplify that across 50 or 100 products. you're facing a virtual impossibility.
That's even top now. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. It is correct that obviously documentation is vital and essential. But one of the mistakes that I noticed within the regulated industry sometimes is that we write too much into the documentation. In other words, we create a documented statement that sometimes is so strict, so specific, that when we make a change, going to what Sean was saying, now we are basically compelled to update that document and to make a regulatory submission because of the specificity level that we put into something that for which we may not have had the need to have done so. So I think that documentation is important, but smart documentation is also important. And this is something that a lot of companies do not recognize. So they want to be so specific because they think the regulators will appreciate that. But then they're bound by such specificity that now whenever they make a change, they have to update the document.
It's especially true, I think, when you in your QMS try to be so specific in your process descriptions that will really hang you up whenever you want to make change. Yes, we had an experience in a company where we did service for other companies for design and development of devices. And of course, we had a very small and tiny process description in our QMS to be able to support all of these different products. Yeah, that's something that's really important. Yeah, and in Europe, we also have these upcoming rules now for environmental compliance, like for CO2 reduction and for avoidance of waste and all that kind of stuff. And this is something that even would apply to those screws and to other material in these kind of machines. They would have to be monitored and maybe changed, and other suppliers will have to be found, and they have to be bound into with contracts on quality, all that kind of stuff. Risk management will have to be adopted. There have to be many more hazards that could apply on the same components. They might not be hazards for patients, but they might be hazards regarding other regulations. And so it's like you have to blow up your risk management file and sort them all again in a different order, or bring new aspects into it. And so these are the current challenges that really appear that might screw up the minds of the people who are in charge of managing all those documents. And would you agree that when you have just dedicated silos of documents, then it's going to be hard to have this screw replaced?
Yes and no. Depends on if you've planned it out. I mean, in the virtual system that I've created, that all these questions, we've built methodologies for doing that, because a lot of startups can't afford to go digital or electronic. So I see where you're going on it, but I want to know what the difference between digital and electronic is. That's kind of one of the questions I'm struggling with on you.
Well, actually, digital and electronic might be, depending on who's talking about it, the same. Electronic is just the hardware, and digital is the software. But for many people, it's already enough to have PDFs in a file system or document management system to call it it's digitalized. For other people, it's necessary that these PDFs are searchable, which is already one step. And then it depends on which kind of search engine you are using. You can go very fast with it or very far. But then if you go further, you may be able to even ask your information or your document system, okay, show me evidence, show me traceability. show me how do I get from a standard requirement to the real process activity that is in your QMS, and where is the evidence that your people work according to this process. So show me evidence of the reports that are created according to this process definition or something like that. And if you can do that easily in paper files, nobody will harm you for that. If you just have one product, maybe that's fine. But as soon as you have to change it, still you will get into problems. You'll get into a lot of work that you have to do.
But how do you do it all in one system? Because like I've seen, like, and I'm using master control as an example. Master control will give you the where is, the documents, and the approvals needed if you configure it, but it's not going to give you the risk linkages. And it's not going to give you, it's not going to give you, if you don't set it up correctly, it won't give you document mentions. So you have to like configure it. So in your proposal, how do you solve all 5 of those with digital?
Yeah, maybe I go a bit further, and you can maybe discuss this again, because we need maybe some wording to get into it and to discuss this further. So just let's imagine the situation of a recipe book, okay? The traditional documentation is like a recipe book. You have a lot of single documents that describe how something has been done once. Okay, how a soup was cooked once, or how you could repeat exactly cooking this soup under the same conditions with the same material, ingredients, and so on. And it's static. It doesn't change. Maybe it has versions. Then you will have to know which is the most current one. But it's static. And if you are the one that creates the recipe book based on the ingredients you might imagine, then you will have a lot of redundant information that you have to create. Okay, cut the onions, cut the carrots, cook the carrots, cook the onions in oil, all that stuff. And this is redundant information that you will find in a lot of recipes all the time. And if you want to change it, like you find out, okay, there's not just one kind of onions, there are various kinds of onions, and now I have to say, okay, there's onions, red onions and white onions, and sweet onions. And so I want to make that difference in some recipes. Then you will have to repeatedly make that change in various of these documents. And this is a lot of work that's boring and that doesn't make fun, and you don't know in which recipes will I have to replace this information right now. And this is exactly the same that the static information in static documents is giving us right now. And then when you would imagine a digitalized recipe book, wouldn't have recipes, maybe even. It would maybe only be able to dynamically create a recipe for you when you ask it, okay, I have onions, I have carrots, and I have beans. Please tell me what I can do with it. And maybe you even give it the information about which tools do you have and which environment do you have to prepare, to even make it more specific on which menus it could give you, or which meals it can suggest you. And that is the digitalized way of knowledge management. It's dynamic. It has reusable components. It's much easier to be set up. You just focus on completely different topics, like you focus on the quality of your ingredients. You can differentiate between the kinds of carrots, the kinds of onions, the kinds of spices you have, and so on. And in the end, you have a much more easier way to also make variants of meals, stuff like that. And this is the difference between the traditional way of documenting, which is really telling you once how something has been made once, and the capability of doing things a standardized way more than once. And it gives you the ability to change fast, to change single components without touching the rest. And to be very fast in creating new combinations of what you already have. So that's the difference between, okay, a slow company, a company that isn't able to do fast changes, even may be reluctant to change, be it necessity to change components, or be it necessity to adapt to new regulations or to new markets. So it's a company that might stay behind in fast changing situations like we have now. And the one that has a knowledge base which is concentrated and focused on the single information items and their possible linkages, and is able to combine this information in a rule-based way, this organization can move much faster and change much faster. So that's the difference from seen from above. And we have digital systems that do this kind of stuff in this world since many years. Just an example from the real world. Just imagine we have so many internet and IT applications. They can be presented in various languages. Look at all the web pages that have various languages that can be translated automatically. This only works with digitalized knowledge systems, with digitalized term structure. It wouldn't work with static web pages. Okay, and this includes mechanisms quite simple, fast, and easy to use that allow, for instance, the change of the languages. Okay, just to give you an example of where in this world we are used to this kind of applications that allow the use of digitalized knowledge, structured knowledge. Have you an idea of what this might carry inside? Is that something you would say, oh, it makes me fear? I think I can't handle it. Or do you think this could be something that can be done the next years in your life? Take care of digitalized knowledge instead of documents?
Are you asking if we think this is possible? If this
Yes.
is achievable?
Yes. I'm asking about the feeling that it makes when you get this picture.
It makes me excited. I don't know how everyone else feels. I mean, I was thinking about your example about the recipe book. Imagine if you had a GPS system that couldn't tell you when roads closed.
Yeah.
I think Waze does that already, though.
Yeah, it does. I'm saying that imagine if Waze wasn't able to tell you about road closures because somebody had to go in and manually change it everywhere. You know?
I know about Adobe FrameMaker and MadCap Flare. Is it something that's relevant to what you're saying?
Uh,
I didn't get you.
Could you repeat the question, please?
I'm saying that I know softwares like Adobe FrameMaker and the other one is MadCap Flare, which have like dynamic, basically chunks of boxes, text boxes, and then you refer them to other documentation. And the idea is that the information is unique at present at one place. So once you update that, it gets updated wherever that's referenced in.
Yeah, that's exactly a very good example for this kind of systems, and an example where it's used exactly for content management. That's where these systems reside. Yeah. Faisal.
Yes, so I love this. I mean, I think I would want to give some sort of an example here or an analogy. because so much of the existing problem really relates to kind of the tradition of writing and documentation. We are experts, we're writing these documents, we're reading them, and there is just a lot of redundancy in that caters to the tradition of writing, but is not necessarily as useful when it comes to the actual, problem. And so digitalized knowledge, I find it extremely poignant. I think especially because of the tools that we have now, we can imagine that we can move beyond that paradigm now, where we don't need to have these people that are sitting and catering to the tradition of writing and documenting in the traditional sense. It reminds me a little bit of, I read somewhere about how scientists would argue with one another maybe 100 years ago about how many teeth are in the horse's mouth, but nobody would actually just open the mouth and check it, because that would not be the tradition. The tradition would be that you argue and you pose these arguments and have a debate about it. But really, that was not necessary once you could have access to horses, I guess. But this, I really love this. I think it makes me feel like this is the way, not even the future, this is the now. And we as regulatory professionals should try and understand how can we help with this. So I'm very, very positive about this.
Fantastic. Deepa?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm an ex-technical writer, and I work with component content management systems. And just a couple of things that have come up in what you've said, Faisal. You mentioned traditional writing. One of the things I think that the word has to be spread is that we have to move away from the traditional writing paradigm where we're writing linearly. We're writing from a beginning and we're going towards the end. We're living in a world where we all contribute now. And so the way that you write is has to change to I'm contributing towards a pot. And when you're changing towards that, what you have to then start doing is identifying different types of knowledge and then labeling them as shareable. So in the regulatory space, one of the things that I used to have to really work through and fight with is like safety notifications. You've got a safety notification, which is a danger. Do not put your finger in here, otherwise you'll get electrocuted. And that's like a risk of death. So that's why it's danger. Now, you don't want to be writing that again and again and again. And if you're writing in a Word document, that's what you're having to do. You're having to copy and paste that several times. When you start with a communal writing, what you do is you identify that risk. And so you go to the risk management database and you say, there's 3 spots on the machine that need a danger. And so we're going to work together and create one danger for it. And anyone that is writing.
Oh, you're muted.
I'll unmute myself. Is that okay? Now you're muted, Sean.
I'm sorry, that was my fault.
All right. Yeah, so we're all writing communally, and I thought you wanted me to shut up. We're all writing about this part of the machine, and so what we do is rather than write my own new danger, I'm going to go and look in the pot and see whether or not there's one that exists, and then I'm just going to refer to it. And so the day that we find a way through mitigation by design to close that gap and make sure that it's no longer a danger, every other part that is referring to that, once we change that one component, every other part gets that update. So all you have to do is just publish a new one, and you've mitigated any risk of having different information. We forgot to update it in this one document because that person was on holiday. you've mitigated that by communal writing. And these frameworks have been they've been in use for quite a while. And in software documentation, ditto was written for software documentation. IBM proposed this system based on, first of all, let's types of information. Let's say that first, when we're going to write something, let's classify the different types of information that we're going to create. So we're going to create tasks and so on. And that allows you to create your first compartment of information types. And then within that, then you can have smaller components that address different parts. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that Regina gets time to get through her presentation.
Yeah.
So I'm going to cut you a little short. I apologize for that.
No worries.
But I would encourage all of you to contribute your comments in the chat as well. And let's let Regina proceed. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, Debo, that's completely true what you said, and it's exactly the way that these kind of systems are meant to be, and exactly like you described with the risk. Yes, there is a regulation that tells, okay, you have to identify in risk management which kind of dangerous or hints to the users you have to give in your IFU, and so it's easily to be set up just the way as you just described. And the advantage is you could show evidence to the auditor that there is a traceability from your risk to your IFU. And that's something that's very important in terms of compliance and evidence for compliance, right? And so the conclusion table just here shows the difference between document-based and knowledge-based information management. And as you see, okay, the structure here, you can read, of course, is files and folders. And on the other side, it's modular and classified items, just as you described it, Daipo. You can make updates in document-based systems only manually, and you have to do them redundantly. And in knowledge-based systems, the updates can be done automatically, like you draw a report from a bunch of information. And so the update is also consistent. The search in document-based systems is really, it's a mess because you can only search based on names and on titles, and in document-based systems, if you don't have a full text search system, you can only search based on the titles of the documents. And so I've seen discussions in teams how these document names shall be created, if the company shall be first, or the date, or the process name, and so on. And this all can be forgotten when you go and have a knowledge-based system. Then you don't need to care for document names anymore, or data titles, file titles. The change impact in document-based environments is really big. You don't know where changes have to be done. And there's a lot of situations where you can include errors quite easily because you just forget a single file because you haven't found it or identified it. And when you have a knowledge-based system, the change is going to be transparent and traceable, and that's the important thing for compliance evidence. And of course, in a document-based system, reusability is limited because you can't identify the content that you want to reuse. You might even think there must be something, but before you find it, you write it yourself down another time, and so you create redundancy that are inconsistent. And in knowledge-based systems, you will have a systematically approach on reusable content, and that's really an advantage that saves you time and is there for helping you with consistency. So if we go and have another idea, how can we start? Like when you have already a system that's document-based and you're in the middle of whatever you do, then you need to find a way to start with a change. And so the change would have to include, okay, I need a new structure. I need to have to create a structure for my knowledge that I have. And I probably will have to check out if there's a system I can use to then manage my knowledge and do what I want. So what you would want to do is select current actions that you have to do anyway, like CAPAs you have to solve, or like change requests which are open, or even a request for a new regulatory framework, like in Europe, the NIS2 adaptation for cybersecurity of the company. So that doesn't only apply to software as medical device, but also to any company that makes medical devices, even if they don't have software. So these would be the process activities that are the ones that are good to start with, because they have an ended amount of a defined amount of linked procedures and other activities that you can already combine it with. So the first steps are, as Dripo already described it as well. So you have to define which information classes you want to include. You have to configure them in the application you choose to manage your information. Then you have to define the relationships that this information classes can have. And you would have to create items then and link them accordingly. And then once you've done that, you can try to derive reports and create the documents that you usually would want to have for whatever evidence you want to show. And that's how you can also test your applications that you might choose to work with. And this presentation has been done also for the European market and the German market. So there's CertHub and Empolis, which are German companies that deliver systems that could be usable for this purpose and might not be known to you, but Matrix Requirements has already been mentioned last time, and Polarion maybe is also not so unknown, although it's now owned by Siemens. These are examples of applications that are easy to configure. In terms of you need to define your information classes or information types and the relationships you might have. And something like Empolis is even capable of keeping large information and knowledge contents that can go through the whole company through any process. So they are closer to a component content authoring system than something like Matrix Requirements, which is quite straightforward as an ALM system, but can also be used for any kind of other information you have to store and to manage. Yeah. So
Nelly,
this is.
does that answer your question?
Of course.
So I guess what I'm struggling with is, concepts between paper, virtual, digital, and EQMS. And like you've got those pilot tools, but I really want to see a demonstration of how those could be used versus just a pointer, because it's all fine and dandy to say you can do this, but until you actually see a live model functioning, it's hard to see the proof in the pudding, right? Does the pudding stand up?
Yeah, agreed. I totally 100% buy what you've got here. These are problems that need to be solved. It sounds like a good way to solve them, but like, or do you have a product that's coming that we're going to talk about, like, or are we just having like a discussion?
This is I'm not going to introduce a new product here. I'm just trying to bring up the necessity of doing this change, giving you some kind of the idea, okay, there might be other tools than the ones that we know in this world that are used for very similar problems very successfully. We just can look at those tools that we know for our let's say regulatory affairs and medical device area, and the tools I wrote here, Matrix Requirements or Polarion, CertHub or Empolis, they can be used for this tasks. Empolis hasn't been used for it, but the other ones have been actually created for it. So like I could show you an example, but I'm afraid we won't meet the time scale for it. But we can sit together in another meeting and go.
I would be interested in that. But the problem with all the tools you listed here they're really expensive.
Yep.
And they're the UIs are you got to really know what you're doing to navigate around them. And so for smaller companies, I don't think that those particular tools are practical.
Well, I was just thinking the same thing, Michelle. The challenge of it is my clients can't afford these tools,
Exactly.
which is why they start with the virtual. But another thing to think about is we talk about this information and everybody contributing. Well, I guarantee you got to validate the person contributing then. How do you ensure the person contributing knows what they're talking about? Because I can tell you there's debates with people I know and respect, and we don't all agree on everything. So then how do you, if you're going to a digital world where you're not going to write a methodology, how do you review that in its totality context to make sure it's meeting the requirements?
And what do you do if it hallucinates?
Exactly. Thank you. That's another one.
Okay. That if we start introducing AI into it before being able to manage what we do, we'll end up in a mess. So actually, without going into the capability of managing structured knowledge, we'll end up in real big problems when introducing AI. Michelle, I'm completely with you when it starts hallucinating and we can't see it because we don't have the means to find it out. So when introducing AI, we need it to write its output into a structured system so we can check whether the answers are reliable. That's the first thing I would ever do. So I'm a strong user of matrix requirements, and I can really show you what I think should be done using it. And yes, these tools cost money. You still would have to think about what it costs not to be able to do changes because you are stuck in your documentation, not to be able to include automation by AI. That's the second thing. But I believe that with tools like matrix requirements and other SAS tools, it's possible to even combine various companies in one instance. We've done that in Europe. We've done that in the Netherlands, especially for startups. There was one consultant caring for more than one startups, and they used the same instance.
So wait a minute, let me clarify because how do you prevent the confidentiality bridging if you're merging or sharing content with multiple clients?
Well, you have user rights, and you can restrict user rights to content. You may have, especially with matrix requirements, have the problem that you can not prevent currently access from the administrator side. But if you as a consultant take care of the configuration, you can avoid the problem of clients seeing each other's content. You would then have to make sure they all have the configuration they need, but they can be different. So there's no technical problem. There's an organizational problem of making sure they don't access each other's content.
The other challenge I struggle with, which, and I absolutely love matrix requirements, but things I struggle with is when you're building a document, the amount of effort, the knowledge is like 3 times the effort to get it, to establish it. Then you've got to have the validation of the knowledge base of who's actually contributing. And then the challenge of it is there are human factor elements. The 7th grader looks at the screen and can't comprehend what's there because it's not fitting the way their brain functions sometimes. So that's why, I've written high performing documentations where you can flow through it in a certain way and it helps the brain process. When I look at matrix, there's users who can't always process what's there.
Yeah, I agree with you, but that's the general problem of digital applications, that the way how our brain thinks might be away from the way how the UI is. But one thing that is really what I believe, our real life is much closer to the experience of structured knowledge management than to the idea of a document. Because in a document, you have a bunch, a huge amount of information that was just created over a maybe large amount of time. But as a human being, we are always in a current situation. And so we are much more in our brain used to have information snippets rather than the whole overview. Usually it's very hard to get that. I think that regulatory affairs people and quality management people are used to work in documents, but still that might not be the way how the brain works. And actually, a data file, a file repository like File Explorer in Windows, this is not something our brain works with at all. It's completely confusing, and so that's why we can't even remember where we find things. But we can work in structures, and so yes, these are all challenges that have to be solved. But if we use these as arguments not to go into that direction, and we get two different problems which are much bigger. I agree.
I'm not using them as arguments. I'm more just bringing up contributing factors to the solution, because while you state that the human brain doesn't function that way, I would beg to differ that if you actually did a personality analysis, that you're going to find there's a group that does function that way, and then another group that functions very data driven. And so I really think if you break it up that way, that's where you need to think about it more, is how does each personality type function in information, and how do they process, because they do it differently.
Well, I can assure you a tool like Polarian or Certab or Empolis, they have a completely different way of interaction, and they are much closer to someone working on a screen. So let's move on. The good message that I wanted to bring is we are in a regulated environment, and that's why we have a big advantage to getting towards structured knowledge, because the standards and regulations we have, they are telling us what to do to cope with the situation. Because first of all, what they do is they deliver a predefined framework for what we have to capture. They really give us the information architecture that we have to provide and that we have to implement. So it really helps us to go through standards and see the terminology they make up, helps us to set up a structure for this knowledge, first of all. And the second is they also have the classification and the traceability rules. So since we have the standards, and if you utilize them a clever way, we don't need to discuss, to argue, or to make really a big deal about, okay, how do we set up our knowledge management architecture? And that's why it's possible to have systems like Matrix Crimes or Polarian, or even Green Light Go is making that even very strict, that come with a predefined knowledge architecture that can be used very simply to at least get in touch with this way of documenting and learn it, and maybe then we might find different tools that do better, and then we change the tool. But we've learned how to handle it. And so it may be an easy to use way, like we written here, each clause from the standard can be mapped to a field. It can be a metadata tag, or it can be an item type. And so these systems are designed, and so we can use them and just think of, okay, we can directly follow what is in the standards, because our knowledge structure has been created that way. And so when we just create items in that structure, we are kind of automatically compliant to what the regulation wants. And that's what I think is good news. There is not that much freedom that we are left alone, but we have everything we need to be able to set up the structure, and then we can use it quite fast. So actually, the standard helps us to get the clear scope. It helps us to get the consistency. It helps us, as I said, with compliance by design when we use a system like that. We're getting closer to audit readiness, and we can use new standards because we can just use the terminology and the ontology that standard provides to include a new regulatory framework and then use like information that we already have, like for instance, thinking about standards for cybersecurity, risk management. We already have ISO 14971 that is telling us, okay, you have to describe a risk in a certain way. And the same way works when we go for cybersecurity. Just it's not the safety of the patient. That's the focus there, and what the safety of the system of the company or of a certain asset, which is still again a piece of equipment that we have already described in our QMS or something like that. So these regulations, they make it possible that the knowledge structure can keep also new frameworks when we just identify, okay, where's the terminology aimed at and which terms are the same, even if they might be different in various frameworks. And so that's how a structured knowledge management system can help us also to go into new frameworks and not have to create another siloed information base in our company. Yeah, that's the good news I wanted to bring. And there's another news, maybe you might not all know, in Germany, there is this MDKU community that is exactly doing what I just described. They start setting up a structure, a data model, using the regulation and medical device from MDR and from FDA, so that nobody needs to think about and argue, okay, how are we going to implement that structure, but really to create a data model that can be used and to change and transfer information from manufacturers to notified bodies. So notified bodies won't have to do a full text search in documents anymore, but they can really use the same information structure that the manufacturer is using to create the documentation. And that then will really make a big difference in quality and in speed of certification and applications. Yeah.
I think, Regina, what would be excellent if you were going to do a follow-up presentation is if you were going to engage with a new client, what steps would you walk through to start, finish, and kind of giving a really good example? Because I mean, this is all theoretical, and that doesn't help me see the product. And so it would be great to figure out what the product is. And so, like, if you were going to engage with one of my clients, what's the first steps would you do? How would you get them engaged? What would you, and then give an example, maybe take a document and a product, an IFU, a QMS document and an IFU, and walk them through converting it to digital. I think that would be helpful for us to have a visual. I don't know, Michelle, what do you think?
Well, as I said here, you should maybe go and start with a CAPA, actually.
Yeah, I think, everybody is going to agree that everything you just said is spot on. But how do we move from talking about it to doing it? I think that that's the conversation when we have a follow-up presentation on this that we would love to see. And not just in a demo, but like of a thing, but like
what's the recipe to go from document to digital management? That's what's the
right.
Because I'm not seeing the end product. And so it's like
I don't even see the recipe. I think I'm gonna make a soup. I think. Now I don't see, and like, am I going to put in a teaspoon of salt? Am I going to put in a tablespoon of salt? Like, I want to see like the recipe exactly like I'm supposed to implement it and how I'm supposed to implement it. Like when they tell you do that, I'm trying to think of some of the recipes where they explain every step and how you're supposed to cook with that step, like saute it, then wait, then blanch and put in water, those kinds of things.
Yep,
exactly. Like, how are you going to actually do this?
So we're running out of time. If anybody wants to put in any solutions to this into the chat, please go ahead and say, like, I use this, or I don't know what to use, or where do we go next? um,
And ideally, ones that do not cost
arm and a leg.
five figures a year.
Yeah, because the startups, the whole reason they go with virtual is because they can't afford it. They don't want to
Right.
put that cost into implementing it and maintaining it and validating it. Really, it's the validation that's the cost.
So how would we
But-
do this if in a virtual system? Because that's how both Nellie and I run our quality management systems.
Hey, Sean, maybe a suggestion would be to have Regina do a follow-on presentation a month or 2 or 3 from now on what they're doing in Germany,
Right.
because that's
Yes.
that's an actual implementation. I would love to hear how they're doing that.
Yeah.
So what Regina mentioned, we are already doing something like that with our risks, our requirements and test cases, basically the verification part as well. So instead of like the software that we use, it has floating licenses. So instead of you paying for every user account, you just pay for the number of accounts that can be simultaneously active. So we can have like up to like almost unlimited users, but we just have to pay how many users can be active at a time. So we get a chance to play with a very expensive software without that 5-figure, 6-figure cost.
And that's Helix ALM.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's probably other systems coming up right now that might fulfill more requirements from the let's say license nature and monetary nature and so on. Like CertHub also isn't so expensive. Ample is of a very high capability of functionality, and it is also about 600 euro per month, but for 20 users, not for 3.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So like it got like everything: forward traceability, backwards traceability, reports, trace matrices, the whole thing.
yeah, Helix is also. So there is tools. I haven't been through all of them. Not everyone wants to tell that. And maybe we need to look into other industries as well, not just our own one. But the message, I hope, is clearly understood right now, that we really need to strive for changing our thoughts about documentation towards structured knowledge management. That's my message.